Hello and welcome back to the studio. Christmas is just around the corner, so I am going to show you how I made these beautiful silhouette ornaments. I made them for my whole family and I'm so excited with how they turned out. For these ornaments, you're going to need a couple of things. The first and most important is the frames that I picked out. So these are actually pressed flower frames if you're having trouble finding them online. I'll have my source linked down below, but I have the 2-inch, which I'm holding right here, as well as the 3-inch. I found that the 2-inch was perfect for single silhouettes and the 2-inch was great for like couples. Now I also used some cotton handmade paper. This has this beautiful deckled edge where it's just like kind of unfinished on the edge, and I just tore it to be the size that I want it to be. So I have like this nice tiny size that fits in my 2x2. It's about 1.5 by 1.5 inches. And it has just like these fluttery edges, which I love that with this pressed flower frame showing through. You can get a similar effect if you use cardstock and just tear it using the technique that I'll show you here in a little bit. You're also going to need a fine ink pen. This is a Micron 01. I used an 01 and 03 for this project to get the details, as well as a Sharpie or a larger marker. Obviously I used a Sharpie to fill in kind of the body of the silhouette, the main part. And then after you have those things collected, we're ready to get started. Now, as you've probably guessed, the easiest way to create your silhouette would be digitally. So take a picture of your subject, draw around the side of their face, their profile, and then resize the image in order to create the size that you want, and then simply print it off on a page that is slightly larger than what you're going for. Then you would create the deckled paper. So to deckle your paper, you use a ruler instead of a pair of scissors, and you simply find the size that you want it to be. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it here because I want it to have that organic edge. And then I am tearing the paper up. So you see that I wiggle the paper back and forth to really encourage that irregular edge to happen. Because I want it to be very organic and irregular. If you want it to be a little more subtle, then you wouldn't do that wiggling, like at the top. And then I just smooth it down with my nail in the opposite direction that I pulled previously. Some people will also use kind of a smoothing tool or like a bone tool. Now let's say you're like most of us and you don't have the benefit of digital illustration tools. What you're going to do is you're going to take your picture. You can just do this on your phone, size it to, kind of shrink it down to the size that you want. You see I'm pinching it down and then I'm taking a screenshot until it is the right size for my piece. And once that's squared away, I'm going to turn up the brightness on my phone and go into a dark room, simply placing my paper over so that I can trace it. See how well you can see that through there? And after pulling the shades, I'm going to lightly trace over it with my fine tip marker, or fine tip pen. Now what I like to do is I like to set the original picture aside so I can still kind of reference it and look at it, and then go back over it with my Micron pen, so my fine tip pen again, making sure that these details are exactly how I want them to be. You can see I already did the face. I didn't even think about recording that initially, but I'm just going around, and as I'm kind of finalizing everything, I'm kind of scribbling in towards the center of the head, and then I'll be filling everything in just a moment with the darker Sharpie. But I really want to make sure that kind of these finer details are filled in beforehand. Now I'm going in with a Sharpie. I'm going pretty quickly because I don't want it to bleed through to the other side. I really like the handmade aspect where you can kind of see some of the texture within the silhouette. If you look in the upper right hand corner, you can see the center of my son's head. There's still like that texture and that speckly aspect. I really like that, so you'll see that I'll keep a lot of this texture in, but obviously if you don't want that, you just go over it more slowly, more carefully. So now I'm going to go through again and just do what I was doing before. I'm not as concerned about it on the hair, but I'm just going through making sure that everything is nice and crisp and sharp so that it looks like that classic silhouette. I'll also go through the rest of the body and make sure that everything is looking as dark as I want it to get, because it didn't get as much of the texture as I want it to kind of cancel out. So I'm just going through and I'm kind of fussing with that. As a side note, if you can hear kind of some little noises in the background, my youngest is drinking his bottle and just kind of playing with it. Anyway, to fill this in, I'm going to continue kind of adding details to the contour as well as filling in. You can see I'm going kind of an up-down motion. This is very textured paper. It has a lot of texture, linear texture, and so going up and down, I'm just going with the texture, kind of like looking for a wood grain. And so that's why you'll see me going up and down like crazy. Now, one thing that I think is really important to consider when you're working on silhouettes are two things. Negative space, especially with hair, can be a great way to add visual interest and to help define a space. Kind of like when we talk about, painting loose watercolor flowers. Negative space can be a great way to kind of help define a space, help make it more clear to the viewer, and just add some visual interest as well. My other major tip for silhouettes is to include eyelashes. So even if you can't see it in your original illustrate or your original photo that you're working off of, my goodness, I'm so tongue-tied. If you can't see it, include it, especially for girls. Now, I didn't include it for my little boys, and I think that that is okay, but it really brought a lot of depth and dimension into my own silhouette. I'll be adding that in a little bit, so you'll be able to see kind of the difference, kind of the before and after. Now, to polish these ornaments off, I did flip them over and I added our names as well as the date and how old each of my boys were. To keep it a little bit more special for my husband and I wrote down what our boys are currently calling us. So in a moment, you'll see me write Mama, which is what my boys are calling us, but I think that this is an awesome opportunity to write, like something that they're saying right now, or just a little note to them, something that you're noticing from each of it's my children, but just people in your life, something, a funny memory that you can look back on every year. It's nice because it's flat, as opposed to like if you're working with a sphere, that can be a little harder to write on. Now here I'm adding that eyelash, and you'll see that really just polishes everything off. It makes it look a little more sophisticated, and I'm just really happy in general with how it turned out. I really feel like that finished it off. Again, I didn't do it for my boys, so I don't feel like it's required, but it can be a nice touch to add. Then you simply add it in. Now if you go back and as you're adding it in, it's a little bit too big, like mine is right here, you're just going to go through. The nice thing about this deckled edge is that you just kind of tear off the parts that are falling off the edge. So I just went in and I tear it off very strategically, and just kind of trying to keep that edge really irregular, which is perfect if you're just kind of tearing things off. And then once it's the size that you want it to be, you just slide it on in there. Now one thing I kind of wish I had done, but I ran out of time, was add a silk ribbon, just kind of like a 1/2 inch maybe, instead of the chain. So taking the chain off and adding the ribbon. But regardless, I know that these are ornaments that we're going to treasure for years to come. I'm so happy with how they turned out. I have one for every single member of my family, and I'm just thrilled with them. If you enjoyed this tutorial or give it a try, I hope that you'll give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comment section down below, or even send me a picture of them on Instagram or Facebook with how they turned out. And until next time, happy drawing!